Over the past 50 years, Americans have tried every major diet: low-fat, low-carb, paleo, keto, Mediterranean, intermittent fasting. Obesity rates have tripled. Not because people lack willpower. Because the diets all focus on what to eat and largely ignore the underlying physiology of why your body stores or releases fat. Research has now mapped that physiology in enough detail to identify what actually determines fat loss outcomes. A 2021 controlled feeding trial published in Cell Metabolism compared ultra-processed versus minimally processed diets with the same calories. Participants on ultra-processed diets ate 500 more calories per day spontaneously, not because they were less disciplined, but because processed food overrides the biological satiety signals that normally regulate appetite. In this video, we are going to see what the research actually says about the best way to lose fat and keep it off. The Fat Loss Research Base has produced some landmark comparative studies in recent years. The DietFits trial in JAMA compared low-fat and low-carb diets with proper controls and got a decisive result. The whole 2021 Cell Metabolism trial mapped the role of food processing on caloric intake. And the classic Tremblay exercise intensity study established that HIIT burns fat more efficiently per unit of time than moderate exercise. These papers define the evidence-based consensus. The most persistent myth in fat loss is that it's purely about calories in versus calories out, simple arithmetic. Research shows reality is more complex. Hormones, especially insulin, leptin, ghrelin, and cortisol, determine whether calories are stored as fat or burned. The type of calories you eat dramatically affects these hormonal signals. Two people in the same numerical caloric deficit can lose very different amounts of fat depending on food quality, meal timing, and stress levels. The diet industry's fundamental problem is that it creates short-term restriction without addressing the hormonal environment. This is why research shows 70 to 80% of diet-induced weight loss is regained within 3 to 5 years. When you simply eat less without changing food quality and metabolic health, leptin falls and ghrelin rises, driving extreme hunger. Your body fights back against the deficit. This is not weakness, it's biology. The DietFits trial settled one of the most debated questions in nutrition. After 12 months, low-fat and low-carb diets produced statistically identical weight loss outcomes, an average of 11 to 13 pounds. The determining factor wasn't the macronutrient ratio. It was adherence and food quality. People who ate more whole foods and less processed food lost more fat regardless of whether they were in the low-fat or low-carb group. The diet debate was largely a distraction. The 2021 Whole Cell Metabolism study is one of the most important nutrition trials in recent memory. 20 participants were randomized to ultra-processed or minimally processed diets for 2 weeks, then crossed over. Despite being told to eat as much as they wanted of both diets, participants spontaneously consumed 508 more calories per day on the ultra-processed diet. They also gained 0.9 kilograms of fat mass in just 2 weeks. Protein is the single macronutrient with the most consistent fat loss research support. High-protein diets, 30 to 35% of calories, produce greater fat loss than isocaloric lower-protein diets in nearly every head-to-head trial. The mechanisms are multiple. Protein has the highest thermic effect of any macronutrient, consuming 20 to 30% of its own calories in digestion. It suppresses ghrelin and enhances leptin sensitivity, and it preserves lean muscle during a caloric deficit. For exercise, research is unequivocal that intensity determines fat loss efficiency. A 1994 study by Tremblay found that HIIT produced 9 times more fat loss per calorie burned than moderate-intensity cardio, measured through fat cell enzyme analysis. The mechanism involves elevated post-exercise oxygen consumption, hormonal response, and metabolic rate changes that persist for hours after HIIT but not after moderate exercise. More recent meta-analyses confirm HIIT superiority for visceral fat specifically. The research now identifies 5 specific levers for sustainable fat loss, each working through a distinct mechanism. Together, they create a caloric deficit that the body doesn't fight back against aggressively, because hormonal signals are being managed rather than just overridden by willpower. Research shows this pattern is more consistent across populations than previously understood. Studies find these effects are measurable and reproducible across independent research groups. The evidence-based fat loss framework has 3 tiers. Tier 1, non-negotiable, food quality shift from processed to whole foods, and protein at 30 to 35% of calories. These 2 alone will produce fat loss in most people by naturally reducing overconsumption and increasing satiety. Tier 2, caloric timing through a 12 to 16 hour fasting window. Tier 3, add 2 to 3 times weekly. Adding each tier compounds the results. The timeline for the evidence-based fat loss approach is realistic and research-grounded. 2 to 4 weeks of food quality shift and protein optimization typically produces 2 to 4 pounds of fat loss without deliberate restriction. Adding fasting and HIIT by week 4 to 6 accelerates results measurably. The goal is 1 to 2 pounds of fat loss per week maximum. Faster rates cause muscle loss and hormonal adaptation that undermines long-term results. Here is the practical daily fat loss protocol. Build every meal around 30 to 40 grams of protein from whole food sources: eggs, chicken, fish, Greek yogurt. Fill the rest of your plate with vegetables and legumes. Avoid ultra-processed foods as a category, not individual ingredients. Set a consistent eating window of 8 to 10 hours. And include 2 to 3 HIIT sessions per week of 20 to 30 minutes each. The personalization dimension is real. Research from the DietFits trial showed that individual variation in insulin response predicted which diet approach produced more fat loss for specific individuals. If you're insulin resistant, lower carbohydrate whole food approaches tend to work better. If your primary issue is stress and cortisol, sleep optimization may need to come first before diet changes produce results. Fat loss is hormonal, and your hormone profile shapes the optimal approach. The best way to lose fat is not the most restrictive way. It's the way that works with your hormonal biology rather than against it. Food quality protects satiety hormones. High protein reduces appetite and preserves muscle. Fasting enables fat oxidation. HIIT accelerates the process. Together, these create a deficit your body doesn't resist, and results that don't reverse when you stop white-knuckling through deprivation. The diet wars have distracted people for decades. The research was always pointing in the same direction: food quality, protein, timing, and intensity. Not the name of a diet. Not a complicated macro formula. Just those 4 levers applied consistently. Research shows this pattern is more consistent across populations than previously understood. Studies find these effects are measurable and reproducible across independent research groups.